There comes a moment, so quiet, so sacred, that only your spirit can hear it. A whisper, not from the outside world, but from within. It's not loud, but it's undeniable. It's that divine stirring deep in your soul saying, it's already done. And yet, your eyes haven't seen the proof. The world around you hasn't changed, but something inside you has, something radical, eternal. A shift has taken place, and you didn't even realize it. You've been through the storm. You've endured seasons that threatened to shatter your very identity, nights where sleep never came, days where prayers felt like echoes bouncing back from heaven's gates. And still you stayed faithful. You stood when you could have collapsed. You believed when logic said to quit. And now, chosen one, something is different. Not in the sky, not in the news, but in you. Without knowing it, you've crossed over. You're no longer waiting for the win. You are the win. The heavens have already celebrated you while earth is still catching up. There's a divine calm in your bones, unshaken by chaos, untouched by fear. And this isn't wishful thinking. This isn't delusion. This is divine alignment. Comment 777. If you felt that strange, holy quiet lately, the kind that says, I don't need the door to open anymore, because I've become the key. You're not chasing opportunities now. You're attracting them. You're not knocking on closed doors. You're building new ones. That's how you know you're not becoming anymore. You've already become. To every precious soul who's ever blessed this ministry with a super thanks, please hear this. We are deeply grateful. Your support doesn't just help us. It fuels a global wave of truth that is lifting other chosen ones who are still in the dark, still searching, still trying to figure out what that deep knowing inside them means. But here's where it gets even more powerful. Have you noticed that your peace is growing while the world around you is in chaos? That you feel calm when others panic? That you feel elevated when nothing around you looks like it's changed? Could that be a sign? Could the spiritual war already be over and you already won? What if the finish line wasn't in front of you, but behind you? Stay with me, chosen one, because in the next few moments, I'm going to walk you through the unmistakable signs that your spirit has already crossed over. This isn't just motivation, it's revelation. You're about to see what your soul already knows. You've already won, and now it's just a matter of time before the rest of the world sees it too. Let's step into that truth together. God's chosen ones. These are the signs you've already won big. Welcome. You didn't arrive here by accident. The timing, the stillness, even the subtle way this message appeared in your life. It's all part of something orchestrated far beyond logic. This moment was written into your journey before you even took your first breath. You've been led here not by coincidence, but by divine design. And now, your soul is responding because something in you already knows this message is yours. That sense of anticipation, that inner knowing when you hear words like chosen, destiny, or alignment, it isn't imagination, it's recognition. You're remembering who you are. You're not here for a passive life. You weren't created to merely survive. You were designed to walk boldly in victory, to carry light in dark places, to become evidence of God's goodness on earth. And deep within you there's a shift, a quiet, holy assurance. The worst didn't break you. The storm didn't end you. Something massive has already changed. Not externally, but within. You're not waiting for transformation. You've already crossed the threshold. So how can you be sure you've already won, even if the physical evidence hasn't caught up yet? First, you've discovered peace in your solitude. Once, silence felt like a punishment. It echoed with loneliness. But now, it has become your sacred sanctuary. You've stopped fearing stillness and started cherishing it. Like the prophet Elijah, who fled into the wilderness and heard God not in the wind, fire, or earthquake, but in a still, small voice. You too have learned that clarity is born in silence. You've realized that when people walked away, it wasn't rejection, it was redirection. The absence of others was never the absence of God. Their departure made room for your revelation. Can you feel how clear your thoughts are now that the noise is gone? Let me tell you about Matteo, a young entrepreneur from Rome. He was once surrounded by friends, colleagues, noise. When betrayal struck and everyone disappeared, he hit rock bottom. But in that quiet space, he began journaling, praying, walking through the city at dawn. What he discovered wasn't bitterness, it was brilliance. Months later, he launched a startup that now funds education for underserved children. His solitude became sacred ground. And you too are standing on such ground now. Second, you've stopped the habit of over-explaining yourself. You used to spend so much time trying to be understood, trying to shrink your brilliance so others could digest it. But now you've become selective, intentional with your time, your voice, your presence. That isn't arrogance, that's evolution. You're not denying anyone. You're just done draining yourself to validate your purpose. Even Jesus said, "Do not throw your pearls before swine." Matthew 7:6. Some people were never meant to understand you because they weren't meant to walk your path. There's a story of Maya, a therapist in Montreal. For years, she tried to explain her vision to peers who belittled her spiritual insights. But after a silent retreat, she stopped needing their approval. She opened her own practice. Her calendar is now filled for months. The moment she stopped explaining, she started expanding. Does this sound like you? Have you felt that pull to protect your energy? Even Pope Francis once said, "True power is service." And in learning to guard your energy, you're learning to serve your mission more fully. You've reclaimed your time, your space, your soul. And where your focus flows, miracles are already forming. Third, your inner world has become your greatest treasure. You're more aware, more awake. Colors appear more vibrant. Your own thoughts carry beauty. This isn't coincidence, it's calibration. You're tuned in now. Even when circumstances seem unchanged, your spirit knows change has already begun. This is spiritual discernment, the ability to sense what cannot be seen, like when Mary, the mother of Jesus, treasured the words of prophecy in her heart before they ever came to pass. Luke 2:19. You've learned to trust the unseen before it becomes the seen. Imagine the transformation of a butterfly, quiet, hidden in the cocoon. No applause, no witness. But inside, the creature is completely changing. When you feel your spirit expanding in silence, when you begin to sense joy in the waiting, it means the wings are forming. I'll tell you about Elias, a musician who nearly gave up his dream after years of playing in empty cafes. One night, in a moment of surrender, he played to an audience of 3, and one of them turned out to be a film director. His music now echoes in theaters worldwide. That night, Elias didn't win the crowd. He won the calling, just like you already have. You're not chasing proof anymore, you're becoming it. This is what it means to already have won. Not because of accolades, not because of applause, but because the inner work is done, the foundation is firm, and the next chapter, it's not something you earn, it's something you walk into. Boldly, faithfully, gloriously. You've already won, chosen one. And now, the world is just catching up to what heaven has already declared. There's another unmistakable sign that victory is already yours, and it's this. The calm inside you is no longer a goal, it's a reality. The storms that once rattled your spirit now feel like whispers in the distance. You used to be consumed by conflict, drained by endless arguments, paralyzed by comparisons. But now, what once felt like chaos now barely stirs you. What once triggered anxiety now passes like a shadow with no substance. You're not surviving the storm, you've become the eye of it. This isn't about life becoming easier, it's about you becoming unshakable. You no longer react to every slight, every misunderstanding, every closed door. Your spirit has matured. You've stopped interpreting delay as denial and pain as punishment. You've come to recognize that peace isn't something you fight for. It's the place you now live from, and that's a massive sign. It's not detachment, it's dominion. It's not avoidance, it's authority. This shift is sacred because when your soul stops vibrating at the frequency of fear and begins to hum with faith, it means you've outgrown the war. Think about Jesus standing silent before Pilate as he was being falsely accused, Matthew 27:14. No defense, no resistance, just a radiant calm rooted in knowing who he was and what his mission required. That silence wasn't weakness, it was power under control. And now you're walking in that same frequency. How many times recently have you chosen stillness over reaction, grace over retaliation? There's a young woman named Leah, an interior designer in Paris. A year ago, she was entangled in workplace drama, always defending herself, always trying to prove her worth. But one day, something shifted. After reading the Psalms daily for a month, she stopped responding to nonsense. She started showing up with quiet dignity, letting her work speak louder than her words. Within months, her manager left, and she was offered the leadership position. Why? Because her peace became her power. And I'll tell you about Darius too, a father of 3 from Atlanta. He used to panic when unexpected bills showed up or when his kids struggled in school. But after a season of prayer and surrender, he told me something I'll never forget. Now, when problems come, I ask God what he's trying to show me, not why he's letting it happen. That mindset shift didn't change his circumstances immediately, but it changed him, and that was enough to change everything else. This calm you're carrying now is not a mood, it's a mantle. You're operating from a place most people are still trying to reach. You've shifted from reactive to reflective. You've moved from fighting battles to commanding peace. And isn't that what Jesus promised when he said, "My peace I give you, not as the world gives"? John 14:27. Picture a mountain lake at dawn, still clear, untouched by the winds that rage above it. That's your soul now. The surface of your life might ripple, but the depths are anchored. Can you feel it? You no longer need to win arguments. You no longer carry the urge to prove your worth to people who are blind to your light. You've already been validated by the only one who matters. And the most beautiful part? You're no longer drained. You're being refilled day by day by the peace that surpasses all understanding, Philippians 4:7. Even renowned speaker and author Brené Brown once said, "You either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness. But you, chosen one, you've stopped hustling, you've started walking. And in doing so, you've crossed into a realm of spiritual maturity most only glimpse. So when you can walk through chaos without letting chaos walk through you, understand this. It's not luck, it's not personality, it's a divine mark. You've transcended the battlefield. You've become the evidence of God's victory. You've already won, not because the world said so, but because heaven did. And now, let's talk about something undeniable, your glow. But not just the surface-level shine of your skin or the way your smile lights up a room. This glow goes deeper. It's your aura, your atmosphere, your spiritual frequency. People feel it before they even see you. They turn their heads, pause mid-sentence, and look your way. Not because of what you're wearing, but because of what you're carrying. There's something about your presence now that disrupts the ordinary. You don't have to speak to be heard. You don't have to move to create movement. Something in you has shifted so profoundly that the world around you adjusts without knowing why. It's not charisma, it's not ego, it's alignment. In Acts 4:13, after Peter and John spoke boldly before the Sanhedrin, the crowd marveled, not because of their education or appearance, but because they recognized that they had been with Jesus. That's what's happening to you now. People can't put it into words, but they recognize something divine has touched your life. And when people tell you you've changed, it's true, but not in the way they think. You've transcended the lower vibrations of gossip, worry, fear, and doubt. You've stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. You've stepped into your God-given identity, and the glow they see is the evidence of your healing, your growth, and your surrender. Let me tell you about Zora, a sculptor from Istanbul. After surviving a painful divorce, she moved into a small apartment and began creating clay figures in silence. No social media, no fanfare, just prayer and art. A year later, her work was featured in a global art exhibit. But more than that, when people walked into her gallery, they said they felt peace. That's the glow you now carry, peace that preaches louder than words. And then there's Rafael, a quiet barista in São Paulo. He never tried to be noticed, but regular customers kept coming back, not for the coffee, but for the calm they felt in his presence. One elderly woman once whispered to him, "I don't know what it is, but when you hand me my drink, I feel like I've been blessed." That's not a compliment, that's confirmation. Even Saint Teresa of Calcutta, known as Mother Teresa, radiated this kind of glow. She once said, "If you are humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know who you are." Her presence moved people to tears, not because of her words, but because of her walk. And like her, you're walking in quiet strength that cannot be faked. Imagine the way a full moon silently lights up an entire ocean at night, without sound, without force, just by being in position. That's you now. You don't need attention. You draw it simply by existing in truth. And have you noticed how even your silence speaks now? How the room settles a bit when you walk in? That's because your energy isn't loud. It's holy. You carry the scent of victory. Even when you say nothing, your life whispers, "I've been through the fire, and I came out refined, not burned." That's what alignment looks like. That's what spiritual frequency feels like. You've become proof that the storm was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal you. And now the atmosphere responds to you, not the other way around. You don't need to convince anyone of who you are. You're showing them without even trying, because what you've gained in the spirit cannot be hidden in the flesh. Your glow is not makeup, it's a mantle. Not attention-seeking, but phantom. Heaven-bearing. It's the kind of presence that makes demons uncomfortable and weary hearts feel safe. This is the glow of someone who has aligned with God. This is the evidence of one who has already won. You've also grown into something sacred, something few ever master, divine detachment. This isn't apathy, it's not indifference. It's the powerful peace that comes when you finally stop trying to control outcomes and start trusting divine timing. You're no longer clinging to broken things, forcing doors open, or begging people to stay. You've stopped manipulating your way into alignment. Instead, you've surrendered. And in that surrender, you've found a new kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to grasp, prove, or chase. You've reached a place where your soul now whispers, "If it's meant for me, it will stay. If it's not, I let it go, and I bless it as it leaves." That's not weakness. That's wisdom forged in fire. Jesus displayed this perfectly in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed with anguish, yet in the end he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. That's the posture you've now adopted. Not passive resignation, but powerful release. You trust that what God has written for you will never require begging. You understand that alignment doesn't come through force. It flows through faith. Do you remember when you used to panic when things fell apart? When delays felt like death sentences and silence felt like abandonment? But now, you stand in the middle of uncertainty with an unshakable calm. You've seen what happens when something ends, how God always writes better chapters afterward. That experience has built your quiet confidence. There's a woman named Elise, a florist in Madrid. For years, she tried to force her relationship to work, adjusting who she was to keep a man who was never meant for her destiny. When she finally let go, truly let go, the peace that followed was immediate, and only 6 months later, she met someone who not only loved her, but honored her purpose. Elise didn't chase love. Love arrived when she chose peace over pressure, just like blessings are now arriving to you, not through struggle, but surrender. There's also Malik, a motivational speaker from Nairobi. He used to hustle endlessly, pitching himself, overbooking, burning out. One day he prayed, then erased half his calendar and trusted that God would fill the spaces with divine appointments. Within a month, he received invitations to speak in 3 different countries. He learned what you now live. Your yes to God is louder than any yes you could force from the world. Even renowned business leader Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, once shared that the company's greatest growth came not when they pushed expansion, but when they paused, recalibrated, and listened. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come when we stop doing and start listening. You've stopped demanding, you've started allowing. You're no longer obsessed with how things will happen. You trust that they will. You don't try to fit divine timing into your calendar anymore. You move when the Spirit says, move. That posture, that ease, that grace, that is the sign of someone who has already won the inner war. Imagine the way a river flows around obstacles, never fighting, just moving forward with the current of gravity and purpose. That's how your spirit now moves. And isn't it freeing? Isn't it beautiful to no longer be entangled in what wasn't yours to begin with? You've learned to detach not out of fear, but out of fullness. When others grasp, you release. When others chase, you wait. Not because you lack passion, but because you've tasted what happens when you let God take the lead. You've made peace with God's no, because you've seen the beauty of His yes that follows. That's not emotional numbness, that's spiritual maturity. And now, you no longer panic when plans fall apart, because you know they're just making room for something more divine. This is the calm of a soul that knows it's held. This is the stillness of someone who no longer needs to win, because the victory is already secure. There's another unmistakable sign that you've already crossed into your divine victory. You've begun to speak your truth without trembling. You no longer shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for your fullness. You no longer silence your convictions just to keep the peace or avoid discomfort. You've found your voice, and more importantly, you've stopped apologizing for using it. Whether in conversation, in your creative expression, in your quiet leadership, or even in the way you think and pray, you're no longer pretending. You no longer entertain falsehoods just to keep others at ease. You've chosen to honor the voice of your own soul. That, chosen one, is a holy act, because every time you speak your truth, even when your voice trembles, you are reclaiming territory within yourself that fear once occupied. Think of Moses standing before Pharaoh. He was never a confident speaker. He told God, "I am slow of speech and tongue," Exodus 4:10. But God didn't remove his weakness. He empowered him to speak through it. And through that trembling voice, nations were set free. What if your trembling voice is the very trumpet God has chosen for deliverance? There's something revolutionary happening inside you. You've stopped editing your soul. You no longer dilute your dreams or decorate your pain just to be accepted. You speak, you write, you lead, you live from a place of truth. And every word rooted in truth is a sword in the spirit. Let me tell you about Nia, a once silent artist from Cape Town. For years she painted what others wanted: landscapes, portraits, commissions. But one day she broke. She painted a piece called The Unseen Cry, a raw expression of her childhood trauma. It shocked her audience. Some unfollowed, but many wrote to say her work gave them permission to face their own stories. That was the moment her voice stopped being polite and started becoming powerful, and her life has never looked the same. And then there's Jonah, a once timid seminarian in Chicago, always agreeable, always nodding, until the day came when he could no longer stay silent about the injustice in his church. He stood up, trembling, and challenged leadership with grace but boldness. It cost him a few friendships, but birthed a community of others who had long felt voiceless. His courage was contagious, just as yours is becoming now. Even Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel Peace Prize winner and education activist, once said, "When the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." You, chosen one, are no longer silent. You've become that one voice, and it echoes far beyond the words themselves. Imagine a lion that's been caged for years, and one day the door swings open. At first it walks carefully, unsure, remembering the old fear. But with each step, its stride returns, its roar returns. You're that lion now, and the shaking in your voice is not weakness, it's resurrection. You've stopped pretending you're smaller than you are. You've stopped entertaining thoughts that belittle your purpose. You've started to think in alignment with heaven, to speak from the depth of your knowing. And that's not just growth, that's spiritual authority taking form. The battle was never about others accepting you. It was always about you accepting yourself, your calling, your brilliance, your anointing. And now you remember who you are. You've come home to yourself. You've stepped back into the full weight of your name, your identity, your inheritance. Every time you honor your truth, you're standing taller in your victory. Every time you refuse to shrink, you are reinforcing heaven's declaration over your life. And now your voice is not just sound, it is confirmation. You are not becoming, you've already become. And perhaps one of the most sacred, undeniable signs that you've already won is this: you've begun to pour into others even when your own cup isn't yet full. You no longer wait for overflow before you offer love. You give from the wellspring of your spirit, not the reserves of your circumstances. You encourage others while still rebuilding yourself. You offer wisdom even while you're still learning. You extend kindness, comfort, and light. Not for attention, not to be seen, but because the light has become your nature. You've stopped giving from effort and started giving from embodiment. This kind of giving cannot be taught by the world. It can only be birthed in the fire of spiritual awakening. Think of the widow in Zarephath. She had only a handful of flour and a little oil. Yet when the prophet Elijah asked her to bake him a cake first, she gave, not from abundance, but from obedience. And what happened? Her jar never emptied. 1 Kings 17:7-16. Like her, you've come to understand that when you give what little you have, heaven multiplies it beyond measure. Isn't it miraculous how your generosity in lack has become a doorway to divine abundance? This is what makes you different. While others wait until they feel ready, you act from your spirit. You speak life even when you're battling death in your own thoughts. You comfort a friend while your own heart quietly breaks. And through it all, you radiate something eternal, a compassion not rooted in logic, but in purpose. I'll share with you the story of Damaris, a single mother in Manila, working 2 jobs to support her children. Every Sunday, she gathers leftover bread from her bakery shift and gives it to homeless teens under a bridge. She has no fame, no platform, but those children call her Tita Miracle. She says, "I give because I know what hunger feels like, not just of the body, but of the soul. Her lack never stopped her love, and that's a mark of true victory. Even in the world of business, there are echoes of this divine generosity. Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks, once said, "Success is best when it's shared." Under his leadership, even part-time baristas received stock options. A decision rooted in the belief that abundance grows when everyone is lifted. It wasn't about perfection, it was about principle. Can you see it now? When you bless others while still climbing your own mountain, you're not just resilient, you're divine. You're not running on fumes, you're fueled by a river within. Jesus himself gave his final words of love and forgiveness while hanging on the cross, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. He gave even in agony, and in doing so revealed the full glory of divine strength. You've stepped into that same frequency, that same sacred flow. You've learned that what flows through you isn't limited by what's around you. Like an underground spring in the desert, it continues to rise from unseen places, quenching the thirst of others while deepening your own roots. You don't give because you have it all together. You give because you're connected to the one who holds it all. That's not just kindness, that's kingdom. That's not just strength, that's stewardship. That's not just selflessness, that's sacred. And as you continue to bless others from your becoming, remember this: you're not draining, you're channeling. You're not emptying, you're aligning. Because, chosen one, this is the truest sign that you've already stepped into abundance. You've become the very river you once searched for. You've also started to notice something subtle, yet profoundly sacred. Your relationship with time has shifted. What once felt like a race has become a rhythm. You no longer wake up haunted by the question, "When will it happen?" That question used to keep you up at night. It used to rob you of joy, anchoring you to a future that hadn't arrived. But now, you've learned how to dwell in the now, not just physically but spiritually. You're no longer obsessed with the outcome. You're tuned into the journey. This presence you now carry, this unhurried calm, isn't laziness. It's a higher frequency, a vibration so grounded in trust that it calls blessings to you faster than stress ever could. Because you've realized that what's meant for you won't pass you. You've surrendered the clock and picked up the compass, and that compass points to something deeper than a date. It points to alignment. Think of Abraham. God gave him a promise that his descendants would outnumber the stars, yet decades passed before Isaac was born. Abraham didn't receive the blessing by rushing the process. In fact, the moments when he tried to force the promise led to chaos. But the moment he surrendered to divine timing, the miracle came. Genesis 21, 1 through 2. And you, chosen one, are now walking in that same kind of holy surrender. Can you sense how light your spirit has become since you stopped trying to control everything? You're no longer driven by urgency. You're guided by faith. Let me tell you about Lucia, a ceramic artist in Lisbon. For years she tried to break into elite galleries, applying, networking, emailing curators, desperate to be seen. Nothing worked. Then one day, she stopped striving. She returned to her small studio and began creating with no agenda, just presence, just peace. 3 months later, a tourist stumbled upon her shop and happened to be the buyer for a European luxury brand. Now her work is displayed across major art houses. Her breakthrough didn't come through hustling, it came through harmony. Even the natural world reflects this truth. Think about a tree. It doesn't rush its growth. It doesn't anxiously count the days to bloom. It just roots deeper, stretches toward the sun, drinks from unseen waters. And in its time, the fruit comes. So too have you learned that divine pauses are not punishments. They are preparations. You're not waiting in vain, you're ripening. You've entered the same spiritual state as Jesus in the wilderness. For 40 days, he didn't panic, he didn't protest, he waited, with clarity, with conviction, with holy patience. And when the time was right, he came out in power, prepared for his mission. Luke 4:1-14. This is the essence of your pause. It's not delay, it's design. And you know it now. That's why the fear is fading. That's why the timeline doesn't taunt you anymore. Because when you wait with faith instead of fear, when you stand in stillness instead of striving, when you trust the unfolding rather than forcing the outcome, you're not stuck. You're already victorious. Time is no longer your master. God is. And you've surrendered your need to rush because you've stepped into the rhythm of divine timing. That rhythm cannot be explained to the impatient, but to the chosen, to you, it feels like peace. And that peace, that sacred pause, that's proof that your future is already in motion. You've also begun to sense something strange yet comforting, a gentle pull towards simplicity, not because life has lost its color, but because your spirit can no longer tolerate the noise of false identities, hollow pursuits, or artificial joy. What once entertained you now exhausts you. What once impressed you now feels empty. It's not that you're bored, you're being spiritually refined. Your soul is shedding the layers of survival and stepping into something richer, the essence of peace. Have you noticed how even the sound of leaves rustling in the wind feels like a divine conversation now? Or how a simple sunrise seems to whisper God's promises into your heart more clearly than any sermon? That's not coincidence. That's clarity. That's heaven teaching you to hear again, not with your ears, but with your spirit. The prophet Elijah once experienced this too. After calling down fire from heaven and defeating the prophets of Baal, he ran and hid in a cave, exhausted and overwhelmed. When God came to meet him, he didn't speak through the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He spoke through a gentle whisper, 1 Kings 19:12. That whisper changed everything. Elijah thought he was finished, but God was just beginning something new in him. You too are learning to hear God, not in chaos, but in stillness. I want to tell you about Marcus, a once high-powered executive from Berlin who lived on adrenaline and applause. He was always flying, closing deals, chasing deadlines. But after a health scare, everything changed. He left the corporate world and moved to a quiet village where he started painting. One of his landscapes recently sold for more than any of his former bonuses, not because of fame, but because of the peace it carried. Peace became his signature, and peace is becoming yours too. There's power in the quiet you're now choosing. It's not isolation, it's intimacy with life. Like a butterfly floating silently through the air, your soul is now drawn to what is light, natural, and free. You're starting to recognize that joy doesn't scream, it whispers. And rest isn't laziness, it's obedience to God's rhythm. Even Jesus often withdrew from the crowds to pray alone, Luke 5:16. He understood that true strength doesn't come from constant activity, but from divine connection. And when you start craving less from the world and more from God, that's a sign your inner world has already transformed. You've won in the most sacred way, not by conquering others, but by mastering yourself. And here's another example. Sophia, a nurse in her 50s, used to find her value in being everything to everyone. She was always doing, always pleasing, always proving. But one day she sat down by a lake near her home and just wept. Not from sadness, but from the relief of no longer needing to perform. That moment became her turning point. She now teaches others how to find meaning in stillness. How many people are still chasing the very peace you've already caught? This isn't detachment from life, it's a deep reconnection to its pulse. You're no longer interested in loud success, but in quiet fulfillment. Not in showing up everywhere, but in showing up fully where God places you. When peace becomes your priority, chaos loses its power. And when your joy no longer depends on applause, you've stepped into a victory the world can't touch. Isn't it remarkable? The world measures winning by how much you gain, but heaven measures it by how much you let go. And as you continue to choose calm over chaos, purpose over pressure, presence over performance, know this: you've already crossed a finish line others don't even know exists. You're not becoming a winner. You are one. Lately, you've been noticing something you can't quite explain, not with logic, not with reason, but only with awe. Certain people reach out at the perfect moment. A stranger says something that matches exactly what you're praying about the night before. A song plays that echoes a hidden fear you just surrendered to God. Numbers repeat: 111, 777, 444, in clocks, receipts, addresses. And you felt it. The chills, the tears, the undeniable sense that these moments aren't random. They're orchestrated. They're divine signals, personal, intentional, and precise. These aren't coincidences. These are confirmations. You've entered a realm of alignment where heaven uses the natural to speak into the supernatural, like when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, not in a grand temple, but beneath an oak tree, calling him mighty warrior, while he still saw himself as weak. Judges 6:12. The message didn't match his current life. It matched his calling. And you're experiencing this now. You're hearing God through ordinary moments because your spirit has become extraordinarily tuned. Have you ever wondered why certain words repeat themselves in your dreams, or why specific Bible verses keep finding their way to you? Not just once, but 3 or 4 times in different places. That's divine repetition. That's God making sure you don't miss what He's saying. Because when you're in alignment, the kingdom speaks louder, not in volume, but in frequency. And you're vibrating at heaven's frequency now. Let me tell you about Adrian, a young entrepreneur from Buenos Aires. He was contemplating closing his small business due to financial strain. One evening, exhausted and hopeless, he prayed, "Lord, if this is not my purpose, show me." The next morning, 3 different customers emailed him with nearly identical words: "Don't stop. Your work is a blessing." None of them knew each other. That same day, an investor reached out with an offer that saved his business. Was it chance? Or was it heaven saying, "Keep going, chosen one"? Your life is becoming a living conversation between you and the divine. Even your setbacks are starting to feel sacred, as if they're part of a greater choreography that's pulling you, not pushing you. You're learning to trust the pauses as much as the progress. The doors that don't open now feel like divine protection, not rejection. How can you not call that victory? Nature itself reflects this pattern. Think of migrating birds, how they instinctively know where to go, even without maps. Or sunflowers, how they rotate toward the sun throughout the day. They don't question the pull, they follow it. That's what's happening to you. You're no longer forcing direction. You're following divine flow. Even the Psalms reflect this truth. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and He delights in His way. Psalm 37:23. You're not just moving, you're being moved. Not just living, but led. And here's another story. Layla, a graphic designer from Morocco, kept dreaming about a mountain she had never seen. The image haunted her for months. One day, while scrolling through photos online, she stumbled upon the exact mountain. It was in Italy. On a whim, she took a trip there. In that town, she met her future husband, joined a creative ministry, and discovered a calling she didn't know she had. Could logic explain that journey? Or was it love, divine love, drawing her home? Each time you recognize a synchronicity, you step deeper into the awareness that you are not alone. That something, someone, far greater is speaking your language, arranging your encounters, planting signs along your path. You've already won because you're not wandering. You're being guided. Your path is lit not by chance but by providence. And when life itself starts whispering in a tongue only your soul understands, that's not magic. That's your Creator saying, you are seen, you are chosen, keep walking. You've begun to notice something strange but undeniable. You've become allergic to the wrong environments. It's not just about preference anymore, it's deeper. Places that once felt familiar now weigh you down like thick fog. Rooms you used to laugh in now echo with discomfort. Conversations that once entertained you now feel hollow, even suffocating. What changed? You did. Not on the surface, but in your spirit. Your soul is no longer willing to coexist with what doesn't honor its growth. This isn't you becoming sensitive. It's you becoming spiritually precise. When Lot was urged to leave Sodom, he hesitated, even though the city was being destroyed. He had become used to the noise, the disorder, the compromise. But the angels pulled him out, not because he was strong, but because he was chosen. Genesis 19:16. There's a part of you now that's no longer asking for permission to leave dysfunction. You simply can't breathe there anymore. And that inner alarm, that heaviness that starts to press against your chest when the environment is wrong, that's your discernment sharpening. That's spiritual maturity showing up in real time. You've stopped tolerating chaos just because it's familiar. You've stopped laughing at jokes that offend your spirit. You've stopped showing up to places just to be seen, and started showing up only where your soul feels safe. And the more you choose alignment, the more you're repelled by anything that disrupts your peace. That's not rudeness. That's elevation. Let me tell you about Khalid, a successful fashion photographer in Istanbul. For years he lived among the elite. Late-night parties, shallow conversations, endless ambition. But something in him shifted. He began waking up before sunrise, walking by the sea, reading scripture quietly. Soon he found himself declining invitations that used to excite him. He started saying no, not out of arrogance but from awareness. Today he leads creative retreats for artists hungry for depth. He lost a crowd, but he found his calling. It's happening to you too. You're no longer impressed by noise. You're drawn to essence. Think of it like a snake shedding its skin. Not because the old skin was wrong, but because it's too tight now. Your spirit has expanded. Your energy has changed. The mask you once wore to survive no longer fits the face of your calling. And even if others don't understand it, you do. You've outgrown your old roles. You've outgrown the cages that once held your identity in place. And that outgrowing is the evidence that you've already won something the world can't give and can never take away. Jesus himself walked away from towns when they were not in faith. In Mark 6:5-6, it says that he could do no mighty works in his hometown because of their unbelief. Even the Son of God knew when to leave the room. And now, you know too. I'll share another story about Serena, a young woman who used to thrive on social media attention. She carefully curated her life for likes, followers, and validation. But one day, scrolling through comments, she felt something crack inside. The praise didn't feel real anymore. She deleted her account, took a sabbatical, and ended up volunteering at a spiritual retreat center in the mountains. There, away from filters and false expectations, she discovered peace that likes could never offer. When she returned, she was no longer a brand. She was a beacon. You too have begun to honor the sacred over the superficial. It shows in what you say no to. It shows in the silence you now crave over noise. It shows in the way your body tenses around falsehood and relaxes in truth. You no longer apologize for protecting your peace. And that's not pride, it's purpose. Like a tree planted by streams of water, you've developed roots. You no longer chase the wind. You stand tall in what's eternal. And now everything that isn't aligned with your frequency naturally falls away. You're not just evolving, you're being refined. And that refinement is proof that the spiritual victory has already been won. You've begun to notice something unexpected, the quiet echoes of your influence. Without seeking attention, without trying to lead, you're leading. People are beginning to reach out, telling you things you never anticipated. How your words comforted them in dark moments. How your silent strength made them believe they could stand up again. How simply watching you live with integrity gave them the courage to walk away from what no longer served them. And the most astonishing part, you weren't trying to be anything. You were simply being you. That's the mystery of divine impact. When you are truly aligned with your purpose, your presence begins to do what your words cannot. You shift rooms without speaking. You lift others without effort. You embody what others are still praying to become, not because you're perfect, but because you've become real. This is what happened to Ruth in the Bible. She didn't set out to be a leader or a hero. She simply chose faithfulness. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Ruth 1:16. That quiet vow of loyalty, whispered in the middle of grief, led to a divine lineage that birthed King David and eventually the Messiah himself. She had no idea her story would ripple across generations, just like you may not realize how your obedience is shaping lives far beyond what you can see. And yet, the ripples are moving, quietly, powerfully. I'll tell you about Ezra, a retired engineer in his 60s from the Philippines. After a deep season of loss, he began writing daily encouragements and slipping them into books at his local library. Months passed and he thought nothing of it. But one day, a teenager approached him in tears. She had found one of his notes on a day she planned to take her life. His message, scribbled on a slip of paper, reminded her that her life had value. Ezra never posted online. He never sought fame, but his healing had created a ripple of hope that saved someone else. Isn't that the kind of impact that lasts? You're not here to perform, you're here to embody. Even Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 5:14, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." He didn't say, "Try to shine." He said, "You are light." And when light is real, it doesn't need a stage. It simply shines, even in silence. There's a young woman named Mia, a fictional example, but no less true in essence. She never thought of herself as special, just quiet, observant and kind. She worked in a coffee shop, always remembered people's names, asked about their families. Years later, one of her regular customers returned after becoming a best-selling author. In his dedication, he thanked her by name, writing, "You reminded me I mattered when I had forgotten." She had no idea the seeds she planted were bearing fruit far beyond her line of sight. Think of yourself like a candle in a cave. You don't need to shout to be seen. You just need to remain lit. And you are. There's something sacred about the way nature works too. A tree doesn't force its branches to grow. It simply stays rooted, and fruit appears in its season. That's you now. Your inner healing is bearing outward fruit, not just for you, but for those who come into your shade. People may not always tell you what you've done for them, but every smile that lingers longer, every heart that beats steadier because of your peace, every soul that keeps going because yours refused to quit. De kaiseri the fight, Batisawat, and Saston, Utasachai, your lovesome, Shasri de Lekai, Bachi, Bachi to Tambains, Naimai Chionsai, being written in real time. You've already stepped into purpose, even if you haven't realized it yet. Your existence is no longer just survival. It's a source of revival for others. That's when you know you're not chasing purpose. You're living it. You're not asking for impact. You are impact. And chosen one, never forget. Even if your name is not spoken from a stage, your presence is felt in eternity. And perhaps the most profound sign that you've already won is this: you're no longer afraid to be alone, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. Where you once feared silence, you now welcome it. You no longer seek out noise to drown the whispers of your own soul. Instead, you desire solitude, not to hide from the world, but to finally meet yourself without distractions. That is not isolation. That is transformation. That is sacred evolution. The Bible speaks of Jesus often retreating to quiet places to pray, Luke 5:16. Even the Son of God needed solitude to align with his Father's voice, and you, chosen one, have entered that same sacred space. You've stopped needing people to fill your emptiness because you no longer feel empty. You've discovered the treasure of divine stillness, where your thoughts no longer torment you. They teach you. You used to reach for company just to avoid your inner chaos, but now you crave moments where it's just you and God, like Elijah under the broom tree in 1 Kings 19, where he thought he was alone and broken. But heaven was already preparing him for a higher assignment. What if your silence is not punishment, but preparation? There's a woman named Maris, an interior designer from Brazil. For years, she couldn't go a single weekend without surrounding herself with friends, parties, or endless activity. But after an unexpected betrayal and time in therapy and prayer, she began choosing long walks, journals, and quiet evenings with worship music. Months later, she opened a retreat center for other women learning to heal in silence. She told her story at a conference once and said, "I stopped fearing my own echo, and that's when I heard God clearly." Isn't that what you've been feeling too? You're not just tolerating your own presence, you're thriving in it. You've become your own companion, your own encourager, your own spiritual sanctuary, and that level of union within yourself is unshakable. That's how God builds warriors, not by surrounding them with praise, but by bringing them face to face with their own reflection and teaching them to love what they see. Can you imagine a tree planted by the river, as in Psalm 1? It doesn't panic during droughts. Its roots run so deep, storms may pass, but it still stands. That's you now. Your roots are in the living water of God's Word. You don't need approval to breathe. You don't need noise to feel alive. You've tapped into the eternal truth. Peace is not out there, it's within. I once heard of a young violinist named Theo. As a child, he was always told he was too sensitive, too intense, too much. He began practicing his music in secret to escape the noise. What started as escape became devotion. By the time he was 22, he was performing in symphonies across Europe. He once said in an interview, "The silence used to scare me. Now it sings back." Isn't that exactly where you are now? The greatest freedom isn't found in crowds or approval. It's found in coming home to yourself. And you have. You're no longer running. You're no longer hiding. The war within is over, and that means the victory is already yours. Chosen one, you've stopped trying to escape yourself, and in doing so, you've finally arrived where God always intended you to be, at peace, whole, ready. Welcome home. And all of this, every shift, every transformation, began before the world even noticed. Long before the celebration, before the breakthrough people could post about, before any visible success, you were already victorious in the hidden places. While others waited for confirmation, you stood in quiet conviction. While the world measured progress by applause, heaven marked your courage in secret. Think of Joseph. Before he ruled Egypt, before the royal robe, he was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, and forgotten in a prison cell. Yet in every low place, he remained faithful. Genesis 39:2 says, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he became successful." Not in the palace, but even as a servant. Success came not because of where he was, but because of who he carried within. And like Joseph, your true victory didn't begin when others clapped. It started when you chose trust over panic, obedience over recognition. This is the silent triumph of the chosen ones. The decision to keep walking when your feet are tired, to keep praying when your hands are empty, to keep believing when everything looks the same. Victory was planted in the very moments you whispered, "Amen," through your tears. It took root when you stood firm without answers, and it began to blossom the day you realized that even without applause, you are still anointed. I'll tell you about Soren, a former pro soccer player turned youth mentor. After an injury shattered his dreams, he disappeared from the spotlight. But instead of crumbling, he began volunteering at a local shelter, helping boys no one else believed in. Years later, one of those boys became an Olympic athlete and credited Soren for changing his life. When asked why he never told anyone about his work, Soren simply said, "I didn't need cameras to know I mattered." Isn't that the kind of hidden strength you've also discovered? Your crown was placed on your spirit before it ever touched your head. That quiet courage you carried when no one saw your struggle, that was your coronation. You didn't wait for the world's permission to rise. You rose anyway. You became like a mountain whose roots dig deeper as the storm rages. Others see only the rocky surface, but beneath is a foundation unshakable. That's you. Your destiny didn't sprout overnight. It was forged in furnace seasons, built brick by brick with unseen faith. Have you noticed how flowers bloom in silence? No trumpet, no spotlight, just sunlight, time, and God's perfect design. You are blooming now, chosen one, in the Spirit first. The world may still be catching up, but heaven has already declared it. Your identity has already aligned with your assignment. And perhaps the greatest part of this quiet victory is that it can never be taken away, because it doesn't come from status or wealth or recognition. It comes from within, from choosing faith over fear, from waking up with tears still on your pillow and deciding to love, to give, to grow anyway. You were crowned long before you were celebrated. Your story is unfolding according to divine timing, and your victory has already begun, rooted in spirit, revealed in identity, and now rising into destiny. The world may applaud later, but heaven has already stood for you. You've come to a sacred turning point. You no longer chase after things that were never written into your destiny. You've stopped trying to earn spaces that were never yours to begin with. Something inside you has shifted, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You've released the exhausting need to explain yourself, to prove your worth to people who were never assigned to your journey. You've stopped knocking on doors that didn't open. Not because you gave up, but because you finally recognized they were never your doors. And love? You've let go of love that asked you to shrink in order to be accepted. That isn't loss. That's liberation. This is the mark of someone who's already won, not in trophies, but in transformation. Just like Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers and thrown into a pit, then sold into slavery. It seemed like everything was breaking around him. But it wasn't punishment, it was positioning. Had he stayed in Canaan, he never would have ruled in Egypt. Could it be that what didn't work out for you was actually God shielding you from a destiny too small? There's a moment when you stop asking, "Why didn't it happen?" and start realizing, what was heaven protecting me from? That shift in thinking, that divine pivot, is evidence of your spiritual maturity. You're no longer trying to glue back together what God already called finished. You've stopped grieving what was never a covenant, only a lesson. I once met Elijah, not the prophet, but a young man from Manila, just 27, and already disillusioned after chasing a high-paying corporate job that drained his spirit. He walked away without a plan, just a knowing. For 6 months, he wandered, prayed, questioned. Then one night, he had a dream about starting a mentorship program for local teens. Today, that small dream has become a national movement in the Philippines. He thought he was losing everything, but God was actually revealing who he really was. What if your delay wasn't punishment, but preservation? This is the refinement that comes only from fire, the fire that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood in without being burned. You too have walked through flames, and not only did you survive, but you came out without the smell of smoke. What used to break you now builds you. What once confused you now brings clarity. And perhaps you've noticed this. Things find you more easily now. The right people, the right opportunities. You're not chasing anymore. You're aligning, you're resting. And in that rest, things are being released to you. Not because you fought harder, but because you finally stopped striving. It's like the eagle. It doesn't flap endlessly through the sky like smaller birds. It waits, and when the right wind comes, it soars without effort. That's the life you're beginning to live. A life of divine alignment. Not forced, not begged for, just received. Even Saint Teresa of Avila, a Carmelite nun and mystic, once said, "God walks among the pots and pans," reminding us that the sacred isn't found in striving, but in surrender. When you stop trying to fix what was never broken and begin honoring what was never meant to remain, a new dimension of your life unfolds. Not one that rewards exhaustion, but one that responds to presence. And now you're finally ready to receive it, because you've stopped waiting to be chosen and started living as the one already anointed. One of the clearest signs that your victory has already arrived is this. You've begun receiving more by doing less, but not because you've surrendered to passivity. It's because you've surrendered to alignment. Your spirit is no longer driven by panic or urgency. You've learned how to rest in trust. The same energy that once scattered you in all directions has now gathered itself into quiet power. You're no longer chasing outcomes that once defined your identity. You've stopped measuring your worth by performance or applause. Instead, your energy now speaks for you before you utter a word. And people feel it. Doors open, not because you banged on them, but because your presence has become a key. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Matthew 6:33. The things you used to fight for are now finding their way to you. That's not coincidence. That's divine rhythm. You've shifted into a frequency where blessings recognize your name without needing to be called. I once met a woman named Daria, a former fashion designer from Milan. At the height of her career, she walked away from the industry. No scandal, no failure, just a soul that grew tired of chasing empty validation. For 2 years, she disappeared from the scene. People called her foolish. But in the quiet, she discovered something richer, a vision to start a creative center for orphans to learn design. Today, her program partners with global fashion houses to give those children a future. She stopped striving, and the mission found her. What if the things you once chased are now chasing you because you finally stopped running from who you are? You're not fueled by fear anymore. You're led by trust. The shift is invisible to many, but undeniable to you. Like a river flowing from a higher place, your life is moving with grace, not grit. Aligned energy now does what anxious effort never could. Just as Moses parted the Red Sea, not by striving, but by raising his staff in obedience, you too are moving mountains with stillness. And yes, there will be those around you who don't understand the transformation, but that's not your burden. You were never called to be understandable to everyone. You were called to be authentic. Remember what Jesus said in John 15:19. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. This path of truth is not designed to make you popular. It's designed to make you real. With every layer of illusion you shed, you become more luminous. Every time you choose honesty over conformity, the false connections fall away, and while some mourn the loss, you don't, because you've finally looked in the mirror and recognized the version of yourself you were always meant to be. That is victory, not the kind that trends online, but the kind that reshapes your eternity. Let me tell you about Mateo, a once promising soccer player in Brazil who suffered a knee injury before his big break. Everyone thought it was over, but Mateo had something else, an unshakable peace. He poured his energy into coaching disabled children, believing that purpose hadn't left him, only shifted. Today, he runs a league that's helped thousands of children rediscover joy through sport. The crowd may have stopped cheering, but heaven never did. Do you see it now? While the world waits to celebrate your external success, all of heaven has already stood in ovation for your internal one. The angels saw what no one else did, the way you kept praying after betrayal, the strength it took to forgive when it hurt, the moment you chose truth over applause. That's when your crown was placed, not in the spotlight, but in secret. Just like Esther was chosen in silence, prepared in hiding, and called forth in the perfect moment to deliver a nation. This victory of yours is not loud, it is sacred, it is rooted, it is unshakable. So do not question your steps just because they don't match the world's blueprint. The ark Noah built made no sense until it started raining. Your peace, your inner clarity, your spiritual discernment, these are the signs. Not the headlines, not the crowds, but the stillness in your soul. You don't need to shrink to be understood. You were never meant to fit into the rooms you've already outgrown. Like a butterfly cannot return to its cocoon, your transformation cannot be undone. And like the sun that rises without asking for permission, your light was made to shine, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. Because, chosen one, heaven has already declared what earth is just beginning to realize. You've already won. You've already won. Not someday, not when the world applauds, but now. You're not sitting on the sidelines hoping for a breakthrough. You are the breakthrough. Your very existence is the shift someone else has been praying for. You're no longer searching for light at the end of the tunnel because you've discovered the truth. You are the light that pierces the tunnel. That inner glow, that quiet strength, that unwavering spirit. It's evidence that something holy has already begun to unfold. Even when nothing looks different on the outside, heaven knows what's shifted within. This is your confirmation. Not a call to hustle harder or to seek more signs, but an invitation to inhale peace and exhale striving. To anchor yourself in divine knowing rather than external proof. The noise of the world may still try to distract you, but your soul has already crossed a threshold. You're not standing at the edge, you've already stepped over. What you're truly waiting for is not approval or applause, it's revelation. Revelation of what's been forming in secret. The truth is, you didn't miss your chance. God was positioning you in silence, and you haven't fallen behind. You were being prepared, refined, set apart. Just like when God led the Israelites through the wilderness, not the fastest route, but the one that made them stronger, holier, and more dependent on His presence. You've been through a similar journey. The detour was never a delay. It was design. And think about the story of Ruth, a woman who lost everything, followed her mother-in-law to a foreign land with no promise of security. Yet her faith and quiet obedience positioned her to become part of the lineage of Christ. What if what felt like a loss in your life was actually your invitation into legacy? There's a young woman I once knew. Her name was Leora. She was a ballet dancer in Tel Aviv who tore a ligament before her international debut. It felt like her world collapsed. But in that stillness, she began teaching movement to trauma survivors. Today, she travels across continents not as a performer, but as a healer. She thought she missed her moment, but in truth, she became the moment. Now is your time to walk forward. not with trembling, but with triumph. You are already marked with heaven's seal, already crowned in the Spirit, already victorious by divine decree. You don't need to wait to be celebrated, to walk in your calling. When David was anointed by Samuel, the oil flowed long before the throne came, and yet the anointing was real, long before the crown was visible. You've already won big, not in the way the world measures wins, but in a way that heaven honors, through growth, through surrender, through obedience when no one was watching, through nights of prayer, through tears cried in silence, through moments when you chose love over ego, truth over comfort, and faith over fear. Like the caterpillar that retreats into darkness before becoming a butterfly, you've undergone transformation in secret, and now the wings are ready. Do you feel them? Even Pope Francis, a humble man known for simplicity and compassion, once said, "We are not called to be successful, but faithful." That faithfulness, even in seasons of hiddenness, is what heaven celebrates. So hold your head high, not in pride, but in promise. Stay anchored in your truth. Stay faithful to your path. You weren't called to blend in. You were called to break patterns, to awaken others just by being who you are. You were never overlooked. You were handpicked. The world is about to see what God has always seen in you, and when they do, they won't be able to look away. Chosen one, keep your head up. Keep your heart soft. Keep walking in love, because the victory is already yours. And now it's time for the world to witness why. And now, as this message draws to a close, let this settle in your spirit. You've already won. Not because of the noise around you, but because of the peace within you. Not because the world applauded, but because heaven approved. The quiet battles you fought, the silent tears you cried, the prayers no one else heard, they were not forgotten. They were sacred, and heaven recorded everyone. You didn't find this message by chance. You were led here as confirmation, as reminder, as divine echo of what your soul already knows. You are the breakthrough, the light, the moment the world has been waiting for. There is nothing missing. There is only more being revealed. So breathe, beloved. Walk forward, not in fear, but in full knowing. The crown is already on your head. If this word resonated with the deepest part of you, leave a 777 in the comments below as a declaration that you are aligned with God's victory, His favor, and His plan for your life. Let heaven and earth bear witness to your faith. To those who have supported this ministry through super thanks, your giving is not forgotten. It carries weight in the kingdom. Your seed is blessed, and your heart is seen. And to those who simply listened, reflected, and let this word touch your soul, we are deeply thankful. You are part of this family, this movement, this divine calling. We invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember that they've already crossed the finish line in God's eyes. Your obedience in sharing may be someone else's answered prayer. Until we meet again, stay anchored in truth, wrapped in grace, and led by the quiet confidence of one who already knows they've won. Because you have, you are chosen, you are anointed, and now it's time the world sees what heaven has always known. God bless you, always.